Welcome to this OSSI Division of Specialized Education Secondary Transition webinar. This webinar is focused on facilitating student-led IEPs. My name is Lindsay Anderson, and I will be presenting the information throughout this webinar. The objective of this webinar is to identify how students, families, and education professionals can work together to develop an effective student-led IEP process for individual students and school communities at large. We will examine steps and resources associated with quality student-led IEPs by exploring OSSI's Student-Led IEP Toolkit and answering our guiding questions, which are: 1. What do educators need to know and do in order to introduce the student-led IEP process to students, families, and other educators? 2. What do students need to know about themselves and their IEPs in order to benefit from the student-led IEP process? And 3. What do quality student-led IEPs look and feel like for students, families, and teachers? Let's begin our examination of the student-led IEP process with a discussion about IEP meeting participation. Let's begin by reflecting on our current practices and beliefs related to the IEP process. I want you to think about the most recent IEP meeting that you have attended. Take a minute to reflect on the meeting and take some notes on your reflections. Write down who was present, who participated, and whether or not this was a typical IEP meeting for students in your school. Think about how you currently define participation. I encourage you to pause the webinar at this point to complete the reflection activity. Hopefully, you have taken this opportunity to identify who typically attends and participates in your IEP meetings. Let's compare our experiences with data gathered by the Zero Center for Learning Enrichment at the University of Oklahoma. According to the Zero Center's data, approximately 80% of students attend their IEP meetings. Other common participants include family members, special educators, general educators, support staff, and administrators. When we consider participation, which we're defining as talking here, we see that special educators often steal the show, talking about 51% of the time. Overall, school staff dominate the conversation, with general educators and administrators talking an additional 18% of the time, and support staff talking 6% of the time. Family members do manage to get their voices into the conversation about 15% of the meeting. Who talks very little? Perhaps not surprisingly, it's the student themselves, talking for only about 3% of the meeting. Take a moment to think about how this data compares with your experiences. Let's now consider the impacts of low student participation in the IEP meeting and process. According to the Zero Center research, students who participate in educator-led IEP meetings, 1. Do not know the reason for their IEP meetings. 2. Report making few, if any, decisions at IEP meetings. And 3. Do not know what is expected of them during IEP meetings. This has a detrimental impact on student transition, as it clearly points to a missed opportunity to develop and practice essential self-determination skills. It could also lead to transition plans that do not fully reflect the strengths, interests, and preferences of the students they are created for. Let's take a closer look at the relationship between student-led IEP planning and post-secondary success. Think about how you would prepare a student for getting her driver's license. What steps would you take? What would be your role? What role would you have the student take? How long would you spend preparing the student? We know that when we teach young people how to drive, we begin by ensuring that they have the knowledge needed to drive safely. Then, we offer them hours of guided practice where we put them in the driver's seat, knowing, however, that we are right there to guide them and help them when problems arise. How successful do you think the student would be if you simply told her how to drive and allowed her to watch you drive? In educator-led IEP and transition planning, adults tell and show students what they need to be successful after graduation. Student-led IEP and transition planning requires that students take an active role in planning their lives after graduation by providing them with opportunities to explore their preferences, reflect on their goals, and advocate for themselves in a safe, supportive environment. Current research indicates that students who actively participate during their IEP meetings are more likely to be employed and/or enrolled in higher education after graduation. Additionally, schools with high levels of student participation in IEP meetings have higher Indicator 13 scores. As a reminder, Indicator 13 means that an IEP includes coordinated, measurable annual IEP goals and transition services that will reasonably enable the child to meet their post-secondary goals. It is common sense to actively engage students in learning how to drive by giving them lots of opportunities to practice before they're expected to drive on their own. Unfortunately, that same common sense has not always carried over to how we prepare students for their lives after high school, during transition planning and the IEP process. Let's examine our first guiding question to see how we can start moving students to the center of the IEP process as a way to help them take ownership of their education and transition planning now and in the future. We're going to dive into the student-led IEP process by addressing our first guiding question. What do educators need to know and do in order to introduce the student-led IEP process to students, families, and other educators? We will not come up with a comprehensive list of knowledge and actions necessary for every educator here, but we will begin to identify what will help each of you to start to facilitate this process in your own practices and school communities. We're going to do this by looking at OSSI's Student-Led IEP Toolkit, starting with the first module of the Best Me I Can Be video series. The video that I'm about to show you is the first video module of OSSI's The Best Me I Can Be video on student-led IEPs in DC. The video was created as a result of a demonstration project overseen by OSSI and School Talk. The videos and other helpful materials are all available on the OSSI Secondary Transition website, which I will show to you at the end of the webinar. Let's take a look at this first video.
There's some skepticism of what really self-advocacy will do for students, especially with special needs students. But I also, after having done this, I think this is extremely important.
I think it's important for students to be involved in their IEP because they need to know what they need.
I think he's become his own advocate in this, he's practicing even in our home. And I think that this whole process has been the most empowering thing that he's gained probably since he's been identified as a special education student.
I had a student who was repeating a grade, and they were making the same types of choices that they made previously that caused them to repeat the grade. And so my idea was maybe if she participated in her meeting and became aware of these goals that we were creating for her, that would be motivation for her. It was ultimately a really good thing for her.
It's absolutely essential, actually, for students to participate in student-led IEP meetings. They might know that their parents come to school and attend a meeting. They certainly recognize that they have deficits, but I don't think they fully understand what an IEP is and what that means for them as a learner.
If students begin to participate in their IEP team meetings as soon as they have an IEP, they will learn that they're entitled to certain provisions as outlined on their IEPs. And they won't know that if they're not in their IEP team meeting.
I feel like more often than not, the student is largely unaware that they have this document. They are unaware of the legal rights that they have, and they don't communicate with their parents about the fact that they have an IEP or they have a learning disability.
Sometimes as parents and as educators, we're hesitant to tell a student they have a disability. We think it might affect their self-esteem. But in fact, they already know that they have struggles. And so part of our job is to educate them.
Jabez, how did you know about your IEP?
Well, my mom just told me that I have an IEP, but I didn't know it was about it.
And Jamin, how did you know about yours?
My mom told me, and my teacher as well.
So when we were beginning this project, I wanted to make sure that students knew or had examples. So one of the things I wanted to do, or I thought I could do, was make sure that it was not text-rich, but provide a resource for our students where they could see another student in the classroom and say, hey, some of those characteristics are some of the characteristics that I have, and they would better understand their disability. Unfortunately, those resources do not exist.
Yeah. The barriers for the student-led IEP demonstration project is that we haven't done this before. There are some pockets of schools who have been supporting students in this way, but we're looking at a shift for the entire District of Columbia. So you have to have buy-in from school administrators, parents, the general ed educators, as well as the special education folks. So this is going to be a team and a group effort to make sure that it's successful.
Marnay, I heard you read in your letter that one of the subjects that you really enjoy is reading. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you feel you've grown in reading this school year.
I'm on a team with the student, their general education teacher, any service providers, if they counseling or speech, and their parents. And I would say that I work closely and try to be in communication with them as much as possible.
Through this whole process, I've learned that as an advocate for him, my job is to educate him, to educate the people in the room in regards to him, and also absorb as much education about the process I can so I can better serve him.
The world of education has its own language, and if you're not taught to understand that language, you always feel like an outsider. So to really allow me as a parent to be a part of the team, make sure that I understand what you're talking about, that I really do get the process and I get what those terms mean. Because once that happens, then I can really make some informed decisions, and the same for the young person.
I think when you use the big intellectual words, it's very difficult for the kids in the room to understand. But if you say, Preston has difficulty reading word problems, that he can understand, instead of saying, Preston has difficulty with reading comprehension and cognition. That's difficult to understand.
I've been in meetings where the teachers and the related service providers almost acted as though the student wasn't there. They would be like, oh, well, Joe is not doing so well, and they're talking to the parent. I'm like, Joe's sitting right there. How about talking to Joe? And engaging him in the conversation. So I think it's really important that the meetings, if the student is there, that those are student-centered meetings.
It's like a meeting for your parents to know what you need, what's your improvements that you need.
Just your parents?
No, and your teachers. And you.
No, you, Jamin. It's about you. Yes.
There's going to be a point in time where students will have to be able to independently navigate their services and supports outside of their parents. It doesn't negate the impact or role of families, but it empowers students to be able to say, this is what my needs are, and this is how I can remain successful in, whether it's school or post-school, where they're looking at employment, or secondary education.
Both Jabez and Marnay helped write their IEP, which means that you need to set aside sacred time for that because it does take time.
I believe the greatest thing in making student-led IEP conferences successful is having the support of the leadership in the school. Because the leaders in the building are so involved with the schedule, the structures in the building, in order to give teachers the time they need, it really does need the support of the leadership in the school to be effective.
At the beginning part of this year, I was approached by the Office of Special Education to consider bringing as an additional effort on top of what they already struggle with at school. But after some conversations, I decided that it was an important effort to pilot.
How has it changed things for you knowing that you have an IEP?
Now I can tell people like my teachers what I need, my goals, and what I don't need.
I started doing some things on my own about knowing yourself, and that was kind of building lessons about how you can familiarize yourself with how you are as a human being, proposing that we take a class period away and work on something that is not reading or mathematics. People are skeptical of that, and I think that's natural, but I also, after having done this, I think this is extremely important as well.
The advice I would give is start one piece at a time. It's extremely overwhelming to take on this entire IEP for a student who doesn't even realize that they have a disability. So start gradually. The other piece of advice I would give is to know your students and know what they're capable of grappling with at that time. So if you're informing them that they have a disability while trying to get them to look at accommodations, that may just be too much for their plate.
For younger students, you can start with a small step of just having them introduce everyone who's at the table, or just having them talk about the things that they like, both in school and out of school.
I like math the most because it's fun and I have really great time in math.
As part of the invitation to IEP meetings, there's a student invitation letter, and it has some guiding questions. So we just started with using those guiding questions and having that conversation with students.
Don't be afraid to have a student answer questions, show a PowerPoint. It really empowers the student, and ultimately it's better for them in the long run because they're able to practice those self-advocacy skills. They're able to really dictate what their wants, their needs, and you really see a change in the student.
They're able to say, these are my strengths, but I do have some weaknesses, and here's what I need in the classroom that will help me be the best me that I can be.
The video gave you some important things to consider when getting a student-led IEP process started at your school. Let's take a closer look at what student-led IEPs look like. Here is a continuum of engagement for a student-directed IEP. As you'll notice, student participation is defined in a variety of ways on this continuum, including attendance, preparation, presentation of information, and leadership. Where do your students currently fall on the continuum? According to the OSSE Secondary Transition website, student participation throughout the IEP process should be individualized and based on the age, needs, and abilities of the student. IEP teams will successfully achieve meaningful student involvement when they work individually with students to determine appropriate levels of involvement and create corresponding plans for student participation. What is clear is that there is no one right way to do student-led IEPs. It's a practice that is going to look different for each student, but our goal should be to have the student participating to the fullest extent possible while we work with them to increase their participation. A huge part of successfully getting started on the student-led IEP process is knowing where you, your students, and your school currently fall on the continuum and identifying clear, manageable steps for increasing student participation in the IEP process. When considering student-led IEPs, it's important to realize that this is a practice that can be used with students from kindergarten all the way to the final years of high school. Of course, it will look different when used with kindergartners than when it's seniors in high school. The specific roles that the student plays in this process will look different from student to student and year to year based on the age of the student along with his or her needs and abilities. It's also important to understand that this doesn't just happen because we want it to. It requires investment. Like most best practices, it requires work and commitment to making the change. Specifically, student-led IEPs require an investment in preparing students and parents. This often takes time. Luckily, most educators who have experienced this process agree that it is time well spent. Finally, student leadership in the IEP can occur throughout the IEP process. Often, we just think about how we can get students involved in the meeting themselves, but we should be considering how that participation can extend outside of the meeting by getting students involved in the preparation and implementation of the IEP. The OSSI Student-Led Toolkit emphasizes the fact that there is no one right way to hold a student-led IEP. As it says on our screen, the challenge is for students, teachers, and parents to find creative ways to involve students in exploring themselves and their needs, and provide ways for students to have a voice in creating their goals and planning how to achieve them. Therefore, you need to work to develop a student-led IEP process that works for individual students and your school community. As hinted at by the quote on the screen, effective student-led IEPs require student, family, educator, and administrative buy-in. Let's take a look at how we can get this buy-in and participation from an important group of people, parents. Family involvement is an important component in successful transition planning and is critical to the success of a student-led IEP process. Often, we need to help parents know how they can get involved in supporting these efforts. Parents can be encouraged to get involved by talking to their child about his or her disability, sharing their own experiences in preparing for IEP meetings, and helping students understand and navigate the IEP process. The payoff for these efforts is that student-led IEP activities often enhance communication between parents and students, which can make the IEP and transition process smoother for all. If we go through the motions of the student-led IEP process without giving students the knowledge and tools they need to authentically participate, they will not receive the full benefits of student-centered planning. Students require a certain degree of self-awareness and basic knowledge about the IEP process before getting started, in order for their knowledge and understanding about themselves and their rights to grow throughout the IEP process and over their years in school. Our second guiding question asks, what do students need to know about themselves and their IEPs in order to benefit from the student-led IEP process? We're going to begin to answer this guiding question by exploring the Building Self-Awareness and Understanding Your IEP modules in OSSI's Student-Led IEP Toolkit. Let's now take a look at the Building Awareness module.
Initially, and I think like most people, you're very skeptical about, I'm going to tell students with cognitive and intellectual disabilities about their disability, and we're going to talk about that. How is that going to work? And in the end, it wasn't even until we did those parts of self-advocacy that I think it really became meaningful to them.
When conceptualizing the student involvement in the IEP process, it's very important for the student to really understand what their disability is and what really goes on into how to accommodate their needs and how to best get the supports, whether it be academic or whether it be in their daily life.
Many students who haven't been through this process before don't even know that they have a disability. They may know that school has been a challenge for them, but no one's ever talked to them and said, you have a disability and here's what it is.
Did you know you had an IEP?
No.
So what was it like for you to learn about it? Marnay wants to be just like anyone else, like everyone else, right? Fit in and be like her peers.
Fifth grade is also a very difficult time for a lot of students. A lot of changes are happening, and there's a big transition into middle school. And they're becoming just more self-aware of where they are performing in relationship to their peers. She was becoming more and more aware that there was a gap between her understanding of the material and her peers' understanding.
Math, for sure. I really liked it, math, once. and I thought I was doing good at it. So when I saw my IEP, I saw I wasn't really doing all that good at it.
From learning that, what did you do for yourself so that you can continue to grow and have success in math?
I had kept setting goals for myself.
You continue to set goals.
Yes.
Okay. What about tools and resources that you can use?
Well, we bring our math journals, and I be taking notes every time in class. So when I have a math test, I can use it.
For some parents, it's like not my kid. This is not my kid because there's a lot of guilt and shame behind it, thinking that maybe I've done something wrong that contributed to my child having this disability, not realizing that it's not anything that you've done. We all learn differently.
So Preston learned that he is a visual learner.
This is how I prefer to learn visual learning. When I see the stuff on the board, it is easy, and when the stuff is highlighted.
When he found out and he took the test and did the activity that we had along with the lesson, he really began to internalize, well, what does it mean to be a visual learner? And he asked my colleague, who's the teacher of the program, well, can I ask for visual aids in all my classes? And of course, the teacher said, well, yes, definitely.
Preston's just face when he was like, you mean I can tell teachers that I need visual representations of things that we're learning? I was like, yeah, you can do that. And he was just so genuinely like a huge weight had been taken off his shoulders.
He began to get visual aids, and the teachers, of course, were very receptive because he was asking for it.
We just need to give them the supports, and if the students are aware of that support, those skills and those supports can kind of transcend every grade coming up and transcend other aspects of their lives, from their peer relationships to working at home with their parents on their homework to say, Mom, where's my calculator?
The curriculum is very much building on what are my strengths, what are my struggles, what are my limitations, and then talking about how all those limitations or struggles kind of work together and form something that might really disable you from doing other things that other people are doing the same way. And it was just really cool to watch because I think just it started clicking in their minds like, oh, it's not because I'm lazy and it's not because I'm dumb. It's because there is some way that my body and my brain works that just works differently than other people. And knowing that, I think they really started to seek out ways that they could change that and get what they need.
Across the board, every student can interact with this material, and they're able to think about, what do I need to be successful, and how do I get there, and who do I ask?
The way that I learn best is making a checklist, my checklist.
We had a short time to work with Tony to prepare him for his meeting. Now we have, in transition group, gone over all the parts of the IEP. What are present levels, what are goals, what are long-term goals, short-term goals, accommodations. Math isn't a strong suit, and if he has a checklist, like he said, it helps him. So I think he's always going to need some guidance, some support, but he'll be pretty independent.
When they have inventory or boxes come in with merchandise, it's my job to unpackage it and put it on a hand cart. That's what I do at O&E.
So next year, Preston, are you going to have the same teachers as you do this year?
Maybe like one.
Maybe one teacher will be the same. So aside from that one teacher, will your other teachers know everything about you and how you learn and what you need and your goals?
No.
So how are they going to find out?
I'm going to tell them.
Yeah? How confident are you that you can tell your teachers about what you need and what your goals are?
On the first day of school, I'll tell them.
I think it has helped him to see his differences as well as his commonalities with other people too. He has to reach out for help, and it's okay to reach out for help and to tell what his needs are.
Preston wants to be a chef, and so in 12th grade, I would hope that he's being given the opportunities in his IEP meetings to say, I want to go to culinary school, and I know that in order to get to culinary school, I need to complete these steps, I need to have this kind of document, and then when he gets there to say, hey, when I'm taking these tests, I need these accommodations.
So first we gotta figure out how many ounces of this, all this stuff.
I felt like the student-led IEP process gave her that extra push and that level of confidence, and also just her own self-awareness and understanding of the fact that there's nothing wrong with her. She's just a different learner than other people, and that she can absolutely apply herself and progress just like other students.
When I get to middle school, I want to achieve all my goals, especially my math goals. When I grow up, I want to be an archaeologist, a scientist, biologist, and a basketball player. My career goals are all involve math, which makes it important for me to strengthen my skills.
During morning math in her classroom, there was a question that directly related to one of the goals that she had just set for herself. Morning math's not her favorite thing, but she saw that question and she goes, oh, that's one of my goals. I need to focus on this. And she started doing it, trying to do it herself. She called me over for some support. And as they were going over that question in morning math, I mean, she full attention.
Now I can keep going?
You got 6. Bring down your decimal.
Great. Okay, so where did you make your error?
6 and 2.
I've seen that what really helps determine a student's success is not the severity of their disability, it's how engaged they are in using strategies to overcome it. The kids who really say, yes, I know that strategy works for me and I'm going to try it, they're the ones who do well.
Nice job, Mermaid. Let's go ahead and give Mermaid 2 good claps.
The Building Self-Awareness module in OSSI's student-led IEP toolkits provides a number of activities that you can do with students to support the development of their self-awareness. It also includes a number of tips from DC educators for talking with your students about their disabilities. The overarching suggestion is that you talk about disability as part of an overall discussion about strengths and limitations. Many teachers reported that they felt less confident about talking to students about their specific disabilities, and that there are limited resources to effectively support these discussions. You can do this by beginning with the discussion of what the student is good at and what the student enjoys doing. After discussing strengths, you can move on to discussing what is more difficult for the student. Often, students can identify these on their own and will point out areas that are related to their disability. You can help the student to make connections between their limitations and specific disability. Finally, make the point that we identify limitations in order to figure out strategies that can be used to overcome the limitations. Work with the student to identify specific strategies to overcome their own limitations. Some other things that you can do include: make the case that everyone has strengths and limitations and that all of us should learn about them. Students with disabilities just get to do it more formally through their IEP. Of course, boundaries are important, but don't be afraid to be personal during these discussions. Share your own limitations and how you overcome them. I've personally found that this helps to open up the conversation as students become more open to sharing their own struggles after hearing about yours. Encourage students to do independent research on their own disabilities. Each student will have different questions about their disability, and individualized research will help them get those questions answered. Finally, it can be empowering to introduce the student to other people who share the same disability. Help them meet successful adults who are willing to share their experiences with their disability. Let's now take a look at the next module, Understanding Your IEP.
So, Preston, let's think back to the beginning of the year, or even to last year. Did you know you had an IEP, or what an IEP was?
No.
No. So what's changed for you now that you know that you have an IEP, and now that you know what is on an IEP? How does that change things for you?
I can I can really go into my IEP meeting and tell them what I need.
Yeah. And what about goals? Does that help you to set goals for yourself? You had a lot of goals in your presentation.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know about having a goal, do you think you can reach it?
No.
No.
The first thing that we really need to do is we want to make sure that they understand what an IEP even is. So we review the vocabulary of what it means to have an IEP, who attends your meeting, what's the purpose of an IEP, what's the role of an IEP, what's part of it, what are the parts and components to it. We talk about related services, so we really talk about all of the different components to an IEP, and we just talk about that first. And then from there, we then break it down and talk about, okay, what's important to you? What are your goals? What are some of the things that you want? So we really spend a lot of time first making sure that they understand the vocabulary, then start working on pulling together some ideas and some goals.
I would like to learn how to make wedding cakes. I enjoy watching cooking shows.
It sounds like you've got some great goals. I remember when you told me that first time about wanting to do a cake during a class. It's something I had never heard of before from you. And I was really pleased that you shared that with me.
Her grandmother did not know that. The transition specialist was able to take note of that and, incorporate that into her transition plan for next year. And so, we do learn a lot of little details that are not apparent just in kind of the everyday, school setting or even the home setting. I talk to Chanel all the time. I had no idea.
What we're hoping is that starting in middle school, by the time, as they get older, they will have heard everything so much and been practicing so much that they really will be self-advocates and be able to make decisions and have a say and a voice in their lives. We found that a lot of the students who don't start until later in high school, that they don't know that they have a disability, they don't know what it means to them, they can't talk about what helps them, they're used to people doing things for them, and they need to be able to speak for themselves.
It's important that they know their rights, because I think a lot of students who have gone through the system in DC often feel jaded, and their rights have been kind of taken away from them, and I think that's really important.
We're letting parents know that upon the age of 18, the rights will automatically transfer to the student, and that's based on the IDEA. But we want to go beyond that and share with students not only about their rights that would transfer to them at age 18, but their rights as a student to receive a free and appropriate public education, and we call that a FAPE.
I have a student this year who's moving to Massachusetts, and we were sitting after school yesterday going through her IEP, and she asked me questions like, well, can't Massachusetts just tear this up? And I was like, no, this is a legal document, Kiana, and you have to say very clearly, in the beginning, I need extended time on my test, or I need to chart my reading on a log because that's what helps me remember it. And then by the end, she was like, so I'm going to find out who my manager is. And I was like, yes.
One of my kids was like, I have rights under IDEA. He was like, what does IDEA mean? And he was like, and one of my goals is I want to know what my rights are. Okay, awesome. But this document is a little complicated.
Let's talk about a need. What do you need to get to achieve that goal?
I would need extra time to read.
Yeah, extra time to read.
And to do extra time to finish my work.
Definitely. And you know what the nice thing is this is going to be your slide for your IEP meeting. So next year, if this gets put in your IEP, guess what? Does the teacher have to give you extra time?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. So when you have this in your IEP, and this is why it's so important for us to make this now, is that your teachers are required by law to provide you these things that you need. So it's pretty cool, right?
Next year in the middle school, we actually work on a bit more on accommodations. So figuring out what you need in the classroom to help you be successful. Do you guys have any ideas about some of the accommodations that you would need? What do you use in the classroom to be successful?
Like, I've been copying down, like, taking notes and everything from math. And when I have a test, I can always bring my math book to help me on some of the problems.
Especially want to make sure that you guys are advocating for yourselves, which means telling people what you need. How powerful is that for a teacher to hear from a student? I know what I need, and I know how you can help me.
What do you think you would do to share with others about knowing that you have an IEP?
I would tell them about it. Like, what is it? Like, what's on your IEP?
Yeah. And what kind of things are on there?
Like, your strengths, what you need and what you don't need.
And your goals, probably.
Yeah.
It's very, I think, personally empowering to see students begin to really internalize this, but want to explain it to others and want others to become self-advocates.
He started explaining his IEP, and he started explaining what it meant to his siblings, and I'm listening in, and I'm thinking, wow, he's exactly right. That's exactly what it means. And then I was thinking to myself, how much further we would be had I done this a couple of years ago.
Knowing what's on their IEPs, of knowing that present level performance to say, my comprehension is here. It gives the students the power to say, I need something different.
As we begin to train students to be self-advocates, we also need to train their families and their parents about what it all means.
The information needs to be put in layman's terms so that people can actually understand, and that they can understand what their child's needs are. What does it mean to have an occupational therapist? What does that mean? What does that mean to have hours inclusive in the classroom? What does it mean to be in general education? But I wish there were someone who, for the parents who are having difficulty coming to the schools, maybe somebody to reach out to them and say, hey, I know you're a little scared to come to this, but let me explain to you what this is about. It's really helped me to gain a better understanding of how vulnerable it is not to have that information. And now that he has the information, me and my husband can just sit back and kind of smile and say, okay, so thumbs up to him. I'm really excited about it. Really excited.
While it takes time, students benefit when we teach them about their IEP. Students who understand their IEPs are more likely to work toward accomplishing the goals that are found in their IEP. They are also more likely to advocate for themselves in order to get what they need to be successful in the classroom. Students who understand their IEP are more likely to be invested in the learning process and to, as a result, make educational progress. Finally, they are more likely to understand the role that services and supports play in helping them to succeed, so they may be more likely to actively participate in using those supports and services, leading again to greater progress. It can be difficult to know where to start when helping students to understand their IEPs. Some basics that students need to know are listed on this slide. We can begin by helping students become familiar with the parts of the IEP, such as present levels of performance, annual goals, accommodations, and the transition plan, as well as the vocabulary that is used throughout it. We can also teach students about their rights as special education students. Once students know themselves and their IEPs, they are one step closer to active participation in their IEP. Finally, we can share and explain the information that is contained in their IEP. The Preparing for Participation and Student-Led IEP modules will help us begin to answer our third and final guiding question. What do quality student-led IEPs look and feel like for students, families, and teachers? Let's watch the Preparing for Participation video.
for 2:30.
The teachers are really proud of the work they're doing and really excited. And where I see the big difference is in those IEP meetings when the students attend and they're well prepared. It's just so amazing to see what the children can do and know that, yes, they have a disability, but they can overcome it and they can succeed.
I love the fact that when parents come to that meeting and they see their student sitting across the table from them and they hear their child talking about the things that they're good at, the things that they realize that they need to work at, and the things that they need from both teachers and parents to help them be most successful, I think it gives a parent a sense of pride that their child is that knowledgeable and is able to advocate for themselves. And it gives them a sense of comfort as they move forward in their learning process and in their schooling.
But when students aren't adequately prepared, when they're just sort of thrown in and someone's like, oh, you're here for your IEP meeting, let me tell you what an IEP is, they don't know what to say. They're overwhelmed by having so many adults in the room, so that advanced preparation is just critical to the success of this process.
Well, you said that you wanted to help me write your present levels of performance, and that you also wanted to write your goals so that everyone can understand them. So in order for us to begin that process, we need to look at your data. Okay. So I brought note cards with me, so that you can make note cards for the meeting.
The way that we help support teachers have the time to be able to do these student-led conferences effectively is that some of their planning times we do dedicate to allowing them to have the time to work with individual students to conference with them, and that gives them that time that they don't have normally during the day.
I've known Nathan probably about 4 or 5 years, and I remember when he first would come to his IEP meeting, he just would sit. And it was really a situation where he didn't seem to be very comfortable with any of it. And now he's very articulate about what he wants. He talks a little bit more about his future. He has a lot more to contribute. He participates more. But what the difference is, we've worked with him to help plan for it. So we've been getting him ready to talk about, what are we going to talk about at your meeting? What are the things that are important for you? What do you want to talk about for jobs? So we've helped to have him prepare so that when he goes to his meeting that he can then be an active participant.
My goals: get better at reading, get a job in sports, learn more about cooking, project, search.
Hey, Gemma, how are you? Good. Good. So you know you have an upcoming IEP meeting, right?
Yes.
So today we're just going to meet and talk a little bit about that, get you set up for that, because I'd like for you to be a huge part of that meeting. Okay? Okay. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is open your folder, and you have a sheet just like this inside. It's a rubric about IEP participation. Can you go ahead and write your name on that and fill out the form? You can circle the level that you believe that you're at. My professional goal this year was to make sure that all of my students participated in some form in their IEP and in the process of preparing for their IEP meeting. It varied with different grades, so this year I've taught 6th grade and 8th grade. With 6th grade, it was more just about them being able to participate in talking about strengths and weaknesses and things that were helpful in the classroom, because that's also helpful to me. Let's talk a little bit about some of the strengths and weaknesses that you have in the classroom. Okay. What do you think some of your strengths are?
I think my strengths are reading the paper kind of fluently, okay, and underlining keywords, writing down notes.
Is that how you were able to determine this?
Such a number.
Good.
One of the things that we can do working in the classroom if you're preparing with an IEP, it does take a lot of preparation time on the teacher's end of it to have the materials together. But if you're going to be working in a technology class, then perhaps the templates and all that you're working on are going to be responses that will be generated into IEP meeting responses versus something that maybe it's a different topic that you're working on. So you can incorporate your IEP meeting into your technology classes.
I copy from it, write down the template first, then make sure that everything's right, make sure I'm reading it correctly before I send the email. This template here is sending an email to my teacher. I want him to come to my meeting.
A lot goes into preparing students to participate in their IEP meetings in meaningful ways. Let's take a look at some things that we can do to help them with that preparation. In order to prepare the student, you must first figure out how the student is going to participate. As discussed at various points in this webinar, participation will look different for each student based on his or her age, needs, and abilities. Here are a few examples of ways in which students might actively participate in their IEP meetings. They might begin by preparing and sending invitations. They could conduct introductions at the beginning of the meeting. They could make a presentation at some point during the meeting. They could communicate their strengths, weaknesses, needs, and interests by answering questions or reading a prepared statement. They could request accommodations. Students might define their future goals and dreams. They might help in writing sections of the IEP prior to the IEP meeting. Or they could facilitate all or part of the meeting. Once you've decided how the student will participate, you are finally ready to prepare him or her for that participation. Let's look at some tips that teachers who have done this have for preparation. In the OSSI Student-Led Toolkit, you will find a number of recommendations from DC teachers about supporting student participation. These recommendations include: involve the student in making decisions about who should attend their IEP meeting. Assist students in exploring the people in their lives that could contribute important information about their abilities and limitations, their needs, and their goals. Students can also help to create the actual meeting invitations. You can also develop the IEP meeting agenda with the student. While developing that agenda, you might identify specific roles that the student is able to play in both the substance and the process of the IEP meeting. For which parts of the meeting do students want to be present? You can refer to the student-led IEP spectrum of participation, which again has been shown at various points in this webinar, for examples of how students might participate. Some common student responsibilities include preparing invitations, facilitating introductions, and making a presentation. You can also support the student in moving out of his or her comfort zone, but you want to allow the student to define their right level of involvement. Make sure that the parent is aware of the role the student will have, especially if this is the first time the student has attended his or her IEP meeting. It's also important that we are sensitive to the needs of culturally and linguistically diverse youth and their families. Providing language translation during an IEP meeting is just the beginning of this. It's important that you are sensitive to the actions that you can take to make the IEP meeting welcoming, and that you are aware of the differences in cultural and family values that might impact youth and family perspectives about appropriate student roles and the substance of the IEP and the transition plan. You might also utilize technology to support participation. Nonverbal students or students who are not comfortable speaking in front of groups can prepare materials in advance that can be used during the meetings. A student can play a slideshow or pre-recorded presentation, or they might allow a teacher to share the presentation if the student does not want to present during the meeting itself. It can be also helpful when you develop questions ahead of time. Help students to identify a few questions that they want to have answered during the meeting. Students can then ask those questions during the meeting, or they can have a parent or teacher read those questions. It's also important that you provide opportunities for practice. Students should be encouraged to practice presentations prior to the IEP meetings. Encourage them to practice in class, at home, or with other teachers. Consider holding a mock IEP meeting prior to the actual meeting. Students can also practice speaking with their general education teachers about their accommodations. Finally, you can create an out for the student. Make sure that students understand that it is okay for them to excuse themselves and leave if they begin to feel uncomfortable during the meeting. Some teachers develop code words or use pre-printed cards for the student to use to pause the meeting or indicate discomfort. Discuss and practice this out prior to the meeting. The student-led IEP continuum, again, is a good way to assess current student IEP involvement and to identify appropriate levels of student participation for their next IEP that challenge but do not overwhelm them. Remember, student participation can take many forms. You should work with your students to identify what's appropriate for them. Let's take a look at the final module from the toolkit, which includes examples of actual student-led IEPs.
Welcome. We're here for Marnay's annual IEP meeting. So here you have some things you want to share with us today.
Yes, I do. Anyway, hi and welcome to my IEP meeting. My name is Marnay and I'm 11 years old. At home, I watch TV, clean up the house, and go to bed. At school, the class that I like the most is reading. I like to read because it's fun. I really don't like math all that much because the questions can be a little hard for me to comprehend. Sometimes I have a difficult time understanding what the question is asking me to do. I want others to know that I have a bright life in front of me, and I'm going to achieve my goals by working hard and getting to my goals. Also, I need help and support from my family and teacher. Thank you.
Thank you, Marnay.
All right. So we had a chance to talk earlier about some of your social emotional goals and some of the things that we've been working in counseling. How do you think things have been going in counseling? What do you think you still need to keep working on?
Some of the things I need to work on is, like Miss Jody said, when I'm playing a game, keep it calm.
Because you can get pretty competitive sometimes.
Yes. That's the word I'm looking for.
Marnay is a really competitive student. She's extremely competitive academically, and oftentimes before the student-led IEP process, she exerted a lot of effort. She's a very invested student, but I would see her shut down. I feel like I have seen certainly that increase in confidence since leading her own IEP meeting, and that especially surfaces in collaborative learning situations when she's working with her peers.
Two parts of puzzle clothes and four cups equals 2 parts. And so we're going higher. So say that all over again. The thing that you said. I said 4 quarts equals a gallon. 8 pints.
So we're here today for Jaimin's IEP meeting. Jaimin, do you know what an IEP is?
Yes.
Can you tell us?
Individualized education program.
And what does that mean?
It means that we all come together, whether my parents, me, and my teachers, and tell my strengths and weaknesses and my goals that I need to improve.
Okay. So we make a plan for you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Jaimin and I actually had a conversation earlier about his strengths and weaknesses and some things that help him be most successful in the classroom. The graphic organizer that we use the most is our reading log, and you're actually not using them. What do you suggest that we do?
I suggest that I probably type it or have, the notes on my phone or my iPad, type it up there and send it to you or email it to you or Miss Erica.
Okay, so you're going to type them as you read. You're going to type notes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to type them in an email or on a note and then send it to me via email?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a pretty good accommodation.
Yeah. So Jaimin, if we added that as an accommodation to your IEP, is that something that you would use consistently and regularly?
Yes.
Okay.
So in the classroom, you could use my iPad, and at home, you could use your iPhone.
Okay.
And then you could send it directly to me. You have my email.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's go ahead, team, and add that as part of his classroom accommodations, that he will use technology in the classroom to show his thinking.
I type what I read, and I type a couple 4 summaries. They bring up reading logs, and they said I wasn't doing it very well. So I said maybe I should type because I'm good with technology.
I learned through Jaimin participating in the IEP process that my style of learning and teaching was definitely not his style, and he has particular ways that he likes to do things, and it seems to make the process of his studying and so forth easier for him.
Do you think your teachers' parents learned anything new about you?
Then I'm not always shy.
Why?
Because I actually participated in it, and my voice was clear, and I talked to most of the meetings. So.
Did you surprise yourself?
Yeah.
I was around the table during Jabez's student-led IEP. There was a point at which I think 4 adults had tears in their eyes because we were all just so impressed and proud of this student who is usually just very reserved. He absolutely rose to the occasion.
I remember when we left your meeting, after you participated, you were really proud of your IEP and you took a picture of it. Why did you feel so? Why were you proud of it?
Because I accomplished actually sitting in the meeting and talking.
After Marnay and Jabez led their own IEP, they just had a sense of pride in their accomplishments. It just gave them confidence.
This is my self-advocacy presentation. Welcome to my IEP meeting. My name is Preston Evans. I'm here to talk about my needs and my goals to get all A's. I would more time to read and to do my work. This is how I prefer to learn visual learning, because when I see the stuff on the board, it is easy, and when the stuff is highlighted, I am able to learn better when teachers give me this demonstrations of how something is done. I'm glad you came.
Preston's aunt, I think, was just the most ecstatic about what had happened because she's just seen a lot of growth in Preston throughout his 7th grade year, especially in these kind of late winter, early spring, right around the time that we really initiated the student-led IEP component to what we were already doing. And I think that's also right around the time that we really started talking about what you need, what your limitations are, what your strengths are, and also what your disability is and what it means to have IEP. So right around the time that we started introducing all these things that are ostensibly difficult to talk about, I think it was right around the time she started noticing him change quite a bit.
I received a call from his math teacher saying, hey, Preston's doing really well in math. Would you mind if he goes into a general population class? And I turned to Preston and I said, hey, your math teacher called and said that you're ready for this math class. And he looks at me and said, oh, yeah, I am. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yes. I said, I'm not sure about this. He said, no, I think I can do it. And so I said, if you believe you can do it, then I'll support it. So went in for the IEP, modified it, and he'll be in an inclusive math class this year.
I mean, I've definitely learned a lot of things. I would say don't be afraid to talk about disabilities with the students and those difficult parts of communicating to them about being in special education. Don't shy away from those, but start those up front because that's when things really become meaningful to the students. And I think they really start to internalize and start to make growth as individuals.
But the most important thing is no matter how afraid you are, no matter how unclear or uncertain you are, is just to get involved. Get involved going to the special education coordinator and discussing it. Get involved having the discussion with your kid. Get involved talking to other parents such as myself, and so you can get a better understanding about this process and feel more relaxed about it.
At the end of the day, we're working towards, making transformational change for our students.
This can make such a huge difference in students' lives. It's not just something I think we're obligated to do because it seems like the right thing to do at this time in special education. I honestly think after seeing it, it's like, no, this can make such a big difference for kids.
Would you recommend that other students participate in their IEP meeting and why?
I recommend that they do because if they want to know what's their growth and what's their strength, and what's their weakness, they need to know about that and what they need to learn to achieve their goal, to get to a different grade or to get where they want to be in life.
I'd say yes, so they'll know about the IEP and what happens in the IEP, and they'll understand that they're the leader of the team that prepares the IEP.
I say yes because it's good for them to know about their IEP and their weaknesses and their growth and their strength. I think it's good.
Now that we've seen some examples of student-led IEPs, let's look at some more teacher tips for quality student-led IEPs. Again, here are some more tips from DC teachers on implementing the student-led IEP process. First, they suggest that you plan for the unexpected. While most student-led IEPs go smoothly and can even be inspirational, it is important to take precautions to ensure that this will be a positive experience for all involved, most importantly for the student. Here are some steps recommended by DC teachers. First, check in with all attending family members before the meeting starts to make sure that they are aware that the student will be participating. Don't assume that because you spoke with one parent, the other parent knows what has been planned. Second, make sure the student is prepared to excuse him or herself if he or she feels uncomfortable and has a place to go. If a student does leave, make sure and follow up with them about what happened. Finally, if the student freezes and is unable to follow through as planned, be prepared to step in and offer to read his or her part. Next, make sure that you debrief with the student after the meeting. Make sure that you plan time to talk to the student about what happened in the meeting and how they felt about it. Ask them, what went well? What would they like to have different for the next time? Record this information for the next year. One creative technique for this is to record the meeting with an iPad or other device. You can then use this recording to debrief the meeting with the student afterwards and to help when it comes time to prepare for their next meeting. Next, teachers suggest that you have a contingency plan for handling any conflict that emerges. Research has shown that student-led IEP meetings are often more positive experiences that promote better relationships between families and schools. However, some families and educators might have concerns about the potential tone of the meeting based on past experiences. To ensure that any conflicts that emerge are addressed appropriately, considered first involving participants in establishing guidelines at the beginning of the meeting, and second, you might create a parking lot for issues that need to be addressed at a later time, possibly without the student present. One of the teacher steps from the last section was to utilize technology. Let's take a closer look at how assistive technology can be used during the IEP meeting to facilitate student participation. Technology can help us to create ways for all students to participate more fully during the IEP process. One common way that students participate is by developing PowerPoint presentations that they then share during their meetings. These presentations can provide information about the student's interests, strengths, and needs, or could be used as a digital portfolio in which the student discusses his or her present levels of performance. Students can also share the assistive technology that they use during the meeting, demonstrating the ways in which that technology is useful to them. Most students will be nervous about taking on a leadership role during the IEP meeting. Many can get beyond the nerves, but others may experience a level of anxiety that makes participation nearly impossible. These students could videotape presentations that they can then play for their teams during the actual IEP meeting. A final idea that I'll share is that you can videotape the meetings and replay them during the debriefing process. Hopefully, you are now interested in starting to use a student-led IEP process at your own school. Getting this type of project started can be difficult, but it's possible, especially given the current level of support for this practice, both nationally and locally. Here are a few steps to help you get started. First, it is essential that you get your administrators and other leadership at your school on board. The video clips that we use during this webinar might help with this. These can be found on YouTube by searching "The Best Me I Can Be." They can be watched in the 5 parts that we used, or it can be watched in its entirety, which is about 43 minutes long. If you are only going to show parts of the video, we would suggest that you show modules 1, 2, and 5, which introduce the practice and show the actual IEP, student-led IEP meetings. I would also suggest that you start small. In your first year, you might only select 2 or 3 students to work with, and then you can build off of those successes. Once you've determined what students you'll work with, determine the appropriate level of participation using the continuum that you've seen many times during this webinar to help you. It is also essential that you make time to work with students. Student-led IEPs require additional preparation with the student, so you will need to create that time to work with them. This is one reason why administrator buy-in is an important first step. Finally, it helps when you engage with parents and other family members to help them understand what you are doing and how they can support your efforts. Again, the videos that we've used in this webinar can be useful. More information on student-led IEPs can be found at the address on this slide. It is here where you will find OSSI's Student-Led IEP Toolkit, which includes the videos that I've shown throughout the webinar, as well as a toolkit that includes resources to support each of the 5 areas that we've gone over during the webinar. Okay, it's time to wrap up now. Here are the 3 guiding questions that we've explored in this webinar. We've used resources that are available on OSSI's Secondary Transition website to identify what educators need to know and to introduce the student-led IEP process to students, families, and other educators. Next, we identified what students need to know about themselves and their IEPs in order to increase their participation in the IEP process. Finally, we examined what quality student-led IEPs look and feel like for students, families, and teachers. If you'd like to learn more about the information provided in this webinar, I suggest that you refer to the resources listed on the next slide. Each of these resources are extremely useful in planning for student-led IEPs. I'd like to be sure to point out that the I'm Determined project has a wealth of resources, including videos and templates. The Zero Center also has a number of resources, including a self-determination assessments and curricula that can be helpful in teaching students the skills that they need to actively participate in their IEPs. Finally, be sure to check out OSSI's Student-Led IEP Toolkit. I thank you so much for watching this webinar and hope that you found it useful.